We got jobs numbers out this morning showing Canada's economy losing 25,000 jobs.
We're playing and gambling with the future of our employees, and we don't know really how long this is going to go.
I think we're seeing it in the sectors that we were expecting to see. For example, manufacturing is still suffering job losses, and we're starting to see public administration, jobs in public administration decline. And those impacts obviously more centered in Ontario.
We need the Canadian government to fight on our behalf. It's not going to happen here in Ottawa. It's going to happen in Washington. We need a timetable. We need to start to work together.
Canada is now facing what looks like a fast-moving economic shock, with around 58,000 layoffs expected to hit the system.
Is this a 6-month plan? Is this a 1-year plan? My answer would be different for each one of those scenarios, because you have to admit and come up with the reality that what you're asking of us is to stand to the front line of a trade war with the United States. And we are the front line.
What seems like a routine adjustment is actually turning into a deeper unraveling of core industrial activity, with factories slowing down, orders, disappearing. And
right now, Canada and the United States, for all the reasons I put down, are the two ugly sisters. And what's leaving is never coming back.
Businesses getting pushed closer to the edge. This is starting to look like a real breaking point, and the pressure doesn't seem to be easing. I can't really treat this like just another headline anymore.
The hits keep coming for manufacturing, especially in Ontario, the province which saw the largest number of job losses last month, according to Statistics Canada. Overall, Canada's economy lost nearly 25,000 jobs in January, while the unemployment rate fell to 6.5%, a result of fewer people looking for work.
When I hear about 58,000 job losses, it doesn't feel like the full picture. It feels like the beginning of a much larger chain reaction. Once you trace it through suppliers and connected industries, the risk stretches into hundreds of thousands of jobs potentially exposed.
Their message was blunt. This isn't something that you can patch over. The supply chain is fully integrated, and if tool, die, and mold making goes down, it takes manufacturing and the rest of the Canadian economy.
At the same time, there's still public talk about affordability and stability. But inside the industrial system, the reality looks very different. What stands out most is how hidden this pressure really is. Most people don't think about the tool, mold, and die sector, but this is a critical foundation of manufacturing. It may sound technical, but this is the layer that everything else depends on. These companies build the tools that allow other industries to produce goods, cars, plastics, machinery, and essential industrial parts. Without this layer, production simply doesn't.
I think we're all upset. We launched this truck in 2021. We hit every metric General Motors wanted to with productivity and safety and quality. Our members took these jobs thinking that they had finally a good job with a good collective bargaining agreement. And a few short years later, because of things that are out of our control under the CUSMA trade negotiations that are happening right now, we're losing our third shift.
Function. So this isn't just one struggling sector. If this foundation weakens, everything built on top of it starts to feel the pressure. That's how interconnected the system really is. What makes the situation even more fragile is how concentrated it is geographically. Around 80% of this industry is based in Windsor, which creates a major concentration risk. If pressure builds in one region like that, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads through the entire manufacturing chain. Canada also holds roughly 25% of all tool, mold, and die capacity in North America.
Ontario bore the brunt of these job losses, and while some provinces did see some gains, experts say there is a general feeling of uneasiness in the labor market right now.
That's a significant share of a critical industry. So if that capacity weakens, the impact doesn't stop at one border. It can ripple through supply chains across the entire region, and the pressure didn't build gradually this time. It hit suddenly. With tariff changes in April 2026, the structure shifted in a way many companies weren't prepared for. Before, tariffs were only applied to the raw material portion of a product. So if a finished item was worth $1,000 and only $100 of that was steel, the tariff applied just to that smaller amount. That made costs more manageable. But now tariffs are applied to the full value of the product. That same $1,000 item can now face hundreds of dollars in additional charges, and in some cases, even more extreme increases are already being reported.
sure, the unemployment rate went down. Isn't that great news? Well, it only went down because fewer people are looking for work.
Right.
So if you've got fewer people in the labor force, you've got a smaller unemployment rate. So it speaks to just the deep and profound uncertainty that has been prevalent in the Canadian jobs market.
There are real examples where tools that previously carried around a $1,500 tariff are now facing charges as high as $36,000. That's the same product, same work, but a completely different financial outcome. The problem is that many of these companies operate on very thin margins, often between 1% and 9%. So when costs jump this sharply,
data from Statistics Canada shows job vacancy rates have dropped to their lowest since 2019, meaning fewer job openings and more competition.
There's almost no buffer to absorb the shock. A small profit can turn into a loss almost instantly. Contracts make things even more complicated. These tools often take months or even up to a year to produce, and pricing agreements were made under the old cost structure. Some companies even agreed to absorb certain costs because they were predictable at the time. Now they're stuck with completed products that are too expensive to ship.
Canada and China agreed to reduce tariffs on select Canadian agricultural exports and introduce quotas on Chinese electric vehicles entering the Canadian market.
We lost a bunch of part-time jobs, but added full-time jobs. So there's like all these little mixes in there, and it speaks to just how mixed the story of the Canadian economy is right now, and how it's done a very good job of adjusting to the trade war and the tariffs and all the uncertainty, much better than I think a lot of people had expected it to. But it's still this weight on the economy. You look at the manufacturing sector, lost another 28,000 jobs.
The moment they ship them, the additional charges erase their margins entirely. So instead of completing the sale, many are forced to hold finished goods in storage. That means no revenue coming in, even though the work has already been done. At the same time, customer behavior is shifting fast in ways that are reshaping entire supply chains. U.S. companies are not sitting still. They are actively moving production, but not always back domestically. A large share of that production is shifting toward Mexico, where costs are lower and operating conditions are more predictable and stable for manufacturers. This is where the situation stops being abstract and starts becoming very real and immediate. A year ago,
Carney had also sharply criticized the United States and Western allies during his address at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
many of these companies were signing contracts under a system that felt stable and workable. Prices were calculated, timelines were agreed on, and tariff levels were predictable enough to factor into long-term deals. In many cases, companies even agreed to absorb certain costs because the environment at the time made that manageable. Fast forward to today, and those same agreements are becoming financially difficult to sustain. The work has already been completed, the tools are finished, and the products are ready to ship. But the moment those shipments move, the added costs can trigger tariff charges that completely change the economics of the deal. In one example, a shipment that was originally expected to carry around $25,000 in tariffs is now facing closer to $130,000 in charges. That is not a small adjustment. That is a full breakdown of the original cost structure. So instead of shipping, companies are holding back finished goods. They are literally sitting on completed products because releasing them would result in a financial loss instead of revenue. At the same time, there is a very tight timeline forming around the industry. Industry leaders are not speaking in vague terms anymore. Many are openly describing a window of around 3 to 6 months before they are forced to make major decisions. This is not a long adjustment cycle, it is a short countdown with real consequences. What makes this even more serious is the age and experience profile of many business owners.
What's the immediate impact if we don't get a resolution to the tariffs on industry? And I don't even want to talk about regionally, I'm talking about Canadian industry. What's the immediate impact? How quickly are companies going to close? How many jobs we're going to lose? What's the fear factor on that front, sir?
A large number are in their 60s. After spending decades building their companies from the ground up, they are not in a position where they want to go through years of uncertainty or prolonged instability. Because of that, business valuations are shifting quickly. Companies that were once seen as stable and profitable are now being reassessed as high risk, which is pushing their market value down significantly. Buyers are becoming more cautious, and many are avoiding taking on uncertain operations altogether. That means selling a business is no longer a reliable exit strategy in many cases. The situation being described by many in the industry is simple and direct. If conditions continue like this beyond a few more months, some businesses may not be able to recover or remain viable. At the same time, another major shift is unfolding in the background. Instead of returning production to the U.S., a growing share of manufacturing is moving to Mexico. From a business perspective, this is a logical decision. Costs are lower and the operating environment is more stable and predictable.
Hey, Lewis, you're absolutely right. When industry leaves, it doesn't come back. We've already seen that in the automotive industry. Once these plants close, they very rarely reopen. So the idea that you're going to be able to, change the minds of these companies once they move, that's likely not going to happen because it's too expensive for us to move industry, especially what we do, which is very highly technical, specialized machines.
But once these shifts happen, they tend to stick. Supply chains do not easily reverse once they are rebuilt in a new location. Once contracts are signed and production is established elsewhere, that activity is very unlikely to return in the near term. Inside industry discussions, frustration is becoming more visible. Some business leaders describe feeling like they are absorbing major external pressures without clear direction or long-term planning signals. Their core request is actually quite simple. They want clarity on what comes next. Is this a temporary disruption or a permanent structural shift? Because that answer changes everything, from pricing decisions to staffing to whether some companies can continue operating at all. Instead of clear timelines, companies are mostly hearing broad statements and general policy language that don't really address the immediate financial pressure they are facing. Because of that, some businesses are now taking matters into their own hands by hiring external consultants to directly engage with U.S. counterparts and try to stabilize contracts on their own. This highlights a deeper issue in the system. Companies are being asked to maintain operations through a trade disruption, but they don't actually know how long they are expected to operate under these conditions. That uncertainty is not just uncomfortable, it is actively speeding up financial stress across the sector.
I will say that I've taken it upon myself to call every one of my clients every month since the tariffs have started to make sure that we're staying in contact, not only what's being said on that side of the border, but to understand what's really being said behind closed doors.
What makes the situation even more difficult is the belief that subsidies alone can fix it. On the surface, support programs and relief funding can look helpful. It creates the impression that action is being taken and stability is being restored. But when you look closely at what these companies are dealing with, it does not solve the core issue. This is not primarily about inefficiency or lack of competitiveness. It is not about outdated equipment or poor strategy. The real issue is the cost structure itself, especially the tariff layer built into it. And no level of subsidy can fully repair a system where the base pricing model is structurally distorted. What ends up happening is a kind of loop. Companies pay heavy tariff costs, then turn around and apply for relief just to survive those same costs. In practice, it almost cancels itself out. On top of that, many companies are being squeezed from multiple directions at once. They are required to purchase higher-priced materials, in some cases while still being taxed again on the finished product. So instead of receiving meaningful relief,
that even if I'm shipping product to Mexico or if I'm shipping it to Canada, it will likely have a final destination of the United States. So we could easily say 90. Sales by volume, I'd probably say that it's probably 80% is US, the other 20% is Canadian.
They are dealing with pressure on both input costs and final output costs at the same time. At a certain point, it becomes clear that subsidies alone cannot fully offset a broken cost structure. If the underlying system is unstable, adding more financial support on top of it does not resolve the core imbalance. Another key issue is how complex modern manufacturing actually is in North America. Production is highly integrated across borders, with materials and components moving multiple times before a final product is completed. Raw materials are processed, then assembled, then refined again, and in some cases moved back and forth several times before completion. Each stage adds value, but under the current structure, each stage can also add additional cost layers. So instead of one predictable cost, companies are dealing with repeated charges at multiple points in the production chain. That compounding effect builds quickly. Even small increases at each step can turn into a significant burden by the time the final product is completed and shipped.
But it's being more increasingly difficult to do business in the uncertainty of the environment we're in. The uncertainty is as bad as the tariffs. Now the uncertainty has been backed up by tariffs that make it unfeasible to do business with Canada.
Once that flow is disrupted, the entire system becomes harder to maintain efficiently. And what frustrates many in the industry is that this level of operational detail is not always fully reflected in higher level decision making. That is why the impact is not contained to just one sector. It begins with roughly 58,000 direct job losses in one area, but the ripple effect does not stop there. These companies supply other manufacturers, which then support additional industries, creating a chain reaction across the broader economy. Suddenly, the exposure expands into hundreds of thousands of jobs across manufacturing-linked sectors, and when you zoom out further, manufacturing as a whole employs around 2.1 million people in Canada, so this is not a small or isolated part of the economy. It is a major structural pillar. That raises a difficult question that keeps coming up repeatedly. Why is there not more urgency around stabilizing the core export-dependent industries, especially when such a large share of production is tied directly to external markets?